name is Doug Olthoff. I am one of the project leads for the National LIP Secretariat project. And one of the things that the National LIP Secretariat project has been doing over the past few years has been maintaining a partnership with the Community Data Program, whereby we are able to provide access to the Community Data Program's wealth of statistical data to all local immigration partnerships through the Immigration Data Portal. This has, I think, been a great benefit to local immigration partnerships who, as part of their mandates, do local level research to establish essentially the core sort of conditions and challenges around newcomer settlement in their communities. And so this partnership, it's a great way to boost the capacity of local immigration partnerships to do that research. However, we have recognized from the beginning that having access to data is only part of the battle, and knowing what to do with all of that wealth of data is equally, if not more important than merely having access. And so from the outset of this partnership, we have been arranging a series of webinars specifically for local immigration partnership staff to learn more about how to use the Community Data Program and the Immigration Data Portal, how to work with the data sets that are available through it. So that's a continuation of that series of webinars. And we're very fortunate today to have Mike from the Community Data Program, as well as Eric from Statistics Canada and Mercedes from the Northern Policy Institute to share with us some of the, not just the data available, but some strategies for working with that data and extracting what we can out of it for use in our work. So what we'll do is we'll have a series of short presentations from our guests today, and then we'll have a period for questions and answers. It seems we have quite a large group today, so hopefully we'll have enough time for everyone to get their questions through, and I think it'll be a great learning opportunity for everyone. So I won't take up more of the time because I think there are more important things to discuss. So I'm going to pass things over to Eric Mongrain to begin his presentation, and we'll carry on from there. So thanks very much for joining, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Is my screen being shared currently? Good. My name is Eric Mongrain. I work for Statistics Canada, specifically for the Diversity and Social Statistics, for the division called Diversity and Social Statistics. My job is I produce the IMDB, the Longitudinal Immigration Database, where the data that we'll be sharing today is from. So I'm going to give a quick presentation on what the IMDB is, broad strokes, and then I'll be available for questions after the question period if anything comes up that's very technical or in depth. Is there a question already? No? Okay. So quickly, the Longitudinal Immigration Database, also known as the IMDB, not to be confused with the movie database online. It's an administrative database. It's updated annually. It combines immigration data with tax data. What does that mean? We get landing administrative data from IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and we link that to administrative tax data coming from CRA. We produce a file stats can called the T1FF, the T1 family file, which is an amalgamation of multiple tax files. And together what these can provide is a longitudinal data set in which you can measure economic outcomes and mobility of immigrants over time. So we have landing information starting from 1980 all the way up to 2020. And as of December 5th of this year, it'll be up to 2021 admissions and up to 2020 for tax data. So again, what you can do with that means if you're trying to track a cohort of a particular year, you could see their tax outcomes in terms of employment income, for example, for 5, 10, 15, 20, up to 40 years if you're looking at the 1980 cohort. These files cover information for permanent residents, also known as immigrants, and non-permanent residents, also known as temporary residents. This includes information on foreign workers, international students, and asylum claimants. And as I mentioned briefly earlier, what this really allows for is a study of socioeconomic outcomes and mobility, and you can control for certain landing characteristics of individuals, which is the benefit of a landing file. Say, for example, you want to look at the breakdown by immigrant emission category. So these emission categories detail the pathways taken by permanent non-permanent residents to be granted permanent residency within Canada. And there's other various characteristics like their countries of birth, where they were living previous to Canada, the knowledge of official languages, level of education, things of that nature. And in the tax files, they're fairly comprehensive. I do believe at the micro level, our tax data has something like 500 tax variables, most of them fairly detailed, a lot of them broad strokes, things like employment income, wages and salaries, self-employment income, things of that nature. The IMDB also includes multiple auxiliary files from the core files that I mentioned previously. So there's a lot going on in this figure. These, I believe, Satya, these slides are going to be shared after the fact. So if you really want to get in depth with this figure showing, you'll have the opportunity to do so. But broadly, what we have on the left side are the administrative files coming from IRCC. So that's the immigration landing data. And on the right side, we have administrative tax files coming from CRA and various forms of that. So what the IMDB is composed of, rather, is landing information. We have from 1952 to 1979, which is less detailed, 1980 forward, which is very detailed. We have citizenship data from 2004. We have express entry data, which is a particular subset of emission category for immigrants from 2015 forward. And which is relevant to this topic today, we have settlement services data from 2013 to 2020. And we take all that landing data and then we attach it to tax data. So we have that TIFF file I mentioned, the T1FF. So anytime you submit your tax files to CRA, it's in the form of a T1. We have T4 files, which indicate wages and salaries. I apologize, this, as of December 5th, rather, the latest years we'll have for the TIFF is 2020, and for the T4 will be 2021 for the sake of timeliness. We also link to mortality data and tax-based files for children, which are ostensibly files for, I won't get into the details of that. The previous presentation I did, I went into detail about that, and I believe there's still a video up online available, and the slides available for that as well. Some are within the CDP, I suppose. But this is broad strokes what the IMDB is. In summary, we take landing information from IRCC, we mush it to tax data so you could follow the subsequent outcomes over time of immigrants. Quickly, what we have available for the public to see, anybody, anytime. Online, we have our technical report, which is 70 pages of super exciting, high octane reading, if you really want to know the nitty-gritty of the IMDB. We have 2 interactive applications. So these are data visualizations, which you can click and play with graphs. And we have dynamic data tables available online. We update 9 every year, or rather we update 11 every year across multiple subject matters, a lot of them dealing with income mobility. So that's broad strokes what the IMDB is. And I'll be available at the question period at the end to answer any detailed questions you might have about the IMDB or the data therein. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'll pass it on to whoever is speaking next.
That's me. Hi, my name is Michael Deiter. I am with the Community Data Program. I deal a lot with data acquisition. Let me share my screen. And some administration of the program. I was just sending out the link there to our previous webinar on the IMDB if you're interested in having a look at that, which is why maybe we're going to gloss over some of the details for this webinar. I have a presentation here I can share as well. But yeah, so the idea here is I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the CDP has in its catalog from the IMDB that you're all able to use. And this is really our, this is sort of our first foray into the IMDB, or I mean, we've refreshed one set of tables now with new data once, but what we have in the catalog is not necessarily, fixed in time. So this could possibly also be a bit serve as inspiration for you to think about what could be done with the IMDB. So I'm going to essentially show you what we have and what you can do with it. In some ways, you can get an idea of what can't be done with what we have. And if you're so inclined to give feedback on directions you'd like to see CDP go with this data set, with this database, then we're more than happy to hear your suggestions. So where can members find the IMDB product? If you go to our catalog and you look under product groups, you just select IMDB, and that will bring up all the tables. If you are part of a LIP, you're a member of the Immigration Sector Network. There is also the Immigration Data Portal. When you go to the Immigration Data Portal, links from this top menu, you can click on this link here, and that takes you to another sort of listing of tables that are available to all of the members of the Immigration Sector Network, all the LIPs. But just to know that you can still use this catalog, and you'll see all the tables. You can look at all the tables that are in the IMDB, but any table that you can only download tables if you're a member of the Immigration Sector Network that we've tagged as a product having to do with immigration. So you can use either way to access the data. Sorry, and that's just showing the link that it goes to when you click there. So what do we have in the catalog from the IMDB? So if you look on the catalog under IMDB, you'll get 20 results, but essentially there really are only 4 tables in there, but they're split out. Those 20 tables represent different geographic levels. For these 4 tables are different tax years, because we have done one update of the original set of IMDB tables that we got. So the 2 sets of tables that we've gotten from the IMDB is what one we'll just call the core IMDB tables, which sort of was meant to create a bit of a profile of tax filing immigrants above the age of 15 at the census subdivision level, census division level, and for custom LIP boundaries. We also got tables from the settlement service data module, which is ICARE data. So that's a second set of tables that we got. And then each of these sets of tables contain 2 sets of data. One will be on economic outcomes and one on mobility. So the 2 times 2, that gives you your 4 tables that I'm talking about here. Just change the slide. It's taking a second. So we're going to have a look at a few of the tables. So I'll try to go over this a little bit quickly. This is also included in the previous webinar that we did, but just to give you an idea of what are in these tables, I've got standard IMDB tables here. It's previously referred to them as the core tables. And these are the dimensions that you'll find in them. All the tables are going to have year of admission and the tax year that you're looking at. Generally have age and sex, split out by admission category as well. And then we have the profile data, which can also be split between different tables. So that may include knowledge of official languages, world area of birth, and citizenship or pre-admission experience. So those dimensions can all be cross-tabulated with each other, but then also can be cross-tabulated with either economic measures, as we got for one set of tables, or the mobility measures. Again, because each set of tables has these two dimensions you can cross-tabulate the data by. Changing slides again. So here we go. So for the ICARE data, Similarly, the dimensions include your admission year, tax year, age and sex, of admission category and world area of birth, but then it also includes this dimension of settlement services that were received. And then those dimensions can all be, again, cross-tabulated by either economic measures or mobility measures. To talk a little bit here about the geography and universe, I touched on that briefly just a few slides ago. We have the census divisions, so those are your regions and your counties. Census subdivisions, that's municipalities, and then we have some LIP custom geographies, which for the LIPs seems mostly to be aggregations of census subdivisions or some census divisions, typically. So that gives you an idea of what we have in the catalog. Again, just show you, we have these 20 tables here. I also just wanted to touch briefly, there's one table that doesn't fit quite neatly in with those 4 tables that I talked about, which is this table 1, which we received and we're not renewing, just so if anyone comes upon it that they're not confused. I think that there was a bit of a miscommunication when we were talking about wanting to get mobility measures for LIP custom geographies. And so what we ended up with for this table is one that indicates both the destination LIP geography. So that would be where upon landing, the person indicated where they intended to go. And then the residence LIP, this is where they would have filed taxes in a particular tax year. So with this table, you can map movement from one LIP to another based on the admission year, when those immigrants arrived, and the tax year when they would have filed taxes in this resident LIP. But this doesn't have the retention rate that we wanted, and so we got another table using the LIP geographies with retention rate, and we won't be renewing this table, at least not unless there's some great outcry from members indicating that it's very useful and people want it. But anyway, I just wanted to touch on that because it may be confusing if you're trying to figure out where this fits into with the 4 tables I described. So I will stop sharing, and I think around now we were going to talk a little bit about what you can do with the tables, what has been done, and work through some examples. So I'll pass the mic over to Mercedes from Northern Policy Institute.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Northern Policy Institute commonly uses the IMDB, and we work with LIPs all throughout Northern Ontario to do this work. So a little bit about us before I get started, in case you're not familiar with NPI. We're an independent evidence-driven think tank in Northern Ontario. Specifically, we have offices in Sudbury, Kirkland Lake, and Thunder Bay, and our mission is to enhance Northern Ontario's capacity to take the lead position on socioeconomic policy that impacts our communities, province, country, and world. I'm Mercedes LaBelle. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst based out of Sudbury, and I lead our community capacity team that covers population growth projects, such as our immigration projects. So like I mentioned, I frequently work with the local immigration partnerships and the RIF in Northern Ontario. As well, I work frequently with rural and northern immigration pilot coordinators. So that's a community-driven economic immigration pilot to measure and assess immigration levels and impacts of immigration. In fact, one of the most common uses of the IMDB is for our 3-year partnership with FedNor, so the Federal Economic Development Agency in Northern Ontario, to monitor and assess the impacts of the RNIP in Northern Ontario communities. So after hearing from Mike about the the tables and the data available in them, I wanted to show you a little bit of the applicability of this data and some uses that you as a LIP coordinator might find beneficial to your work. Our first example is a paper series we did for the 5 Northern Ontario LIP communities, which also are the RNIP communities in Northern Ontario. So that's North Bay, Timmins, Sault Ste. Marie, Thunder Bay, and Sudbury. The premise for these papers was to establish a baseline understanding of current immigration trends and demographic characteristics of immigrants to engage in evidence-based decision-making that'll positively impact Northern Ontario communities. So like I mentioned, each of these 5 communities got their own report, which was used as a tool for the RNIP, the LIP, economic development, municipalities, to know better what's going on in their region in regards to immigration. And again, to evaluate immigration pilot programs such as the RNIP and different welcoming initiatives happening in our communities. Whoops. So along with the IMDB, we also used other CDP data sources. I'm not sure, Mike will have to specify whether or not they're available to immigration actors under the program he was talking about recently, but we used things like target group profiles, other tax filer data, and then we made a data request to IRCC for some admission data. But indicators we gathered specifically from the IMDB, the ones listed on the screen. So immigration characteristics like country of birth, sex, age at landing, language spoken, stream of admission, income characteristics like median and mean total income, employment earnings, and then economic outcomes like employment earnings, participation rates, employment rates, mobility. And I know Mike's going to go into this a little bit more in detail, but some settlement service data as well. I also put the link on the screen in case you're ever interested in reading a little bit more about the reports and seeing maybe if this is something that would be useful or applicable for your community to have. The second example I wanted to highlight is our Taking Aim paper series. So this was done in partnership with the RIF in Northern Ontario. So it's a Francophone local immigration partnership. And they asked how many future French-speaking and Francophone migrants should be targeted to maintain current levels in Northern Ontario. So though some of the data we use to create these reports are in theory offered through the IMDB, but specifically for the geographies we were asked to work with, the numbers were too low to be used. But if they're not for your community, then the IMDB could be a tool to replicate some of this work. We did it for the 5 CMA-CAs in Northern Ontario and the 11 CDs as well. Yeah, and then we also used other data sets like the target group profiles of Francophones, French speakers, and age groups. So again, here's the link if you're interested in that one. And I was going to take you through a quick example or kind of just show you what it looks like to go through this process and what we did here at MPI to use the IMDB. And I know Mike, again, is going to go through this in a little bit more detail, so I'll just give you a little bit of a high-level overview. So you saw this already, but you can click the little green Find Data button, put in the IMDB, and then all the tables that are available to you will pop up. This is what it looks like in Beyond 2020, which is the software used to manipulate the IMDB. I specifically wanted to use this example because when evaluating a work experience-based program like RNIP, that will potentially have direct impacts on economic migrants, it's very useful to have stream-specific data to better assess program impacts. This example, we're looking specifically at median total income for immigrants living within the 5 Northern Ontario LIP boundaries. So economic outcomes, as we know, such as income and involvement in the labor market, typically differ depending on the immigration stream the immigrant followed. This table includes the tax filer's income from all taxable sources, so all market incomes such as employment earnings, and it also includes non-taxable sources, so government transfers such as social assistance or child benefits as well. So in most instances where data is available, median total income is higher among those in the economic immigrant stream, specifically principal applicants. And then a slightly different side of the coin. Here we're looking at median employment earnings for the same immigrants living within the 5 no-LIP boundaries. So sorry, Northern Ontario Local Immigration Partnership boundaries. We abbreviate it as a no-LIP. So employment income is the sum of wages, salaries, commissions, and self-employment income. So specifically compared to the last table, this one does not include non-taxable benefits like social assistance or childcare. So we see the income levels differ slightly from the last slide. And then if you want to do any kind of calculations, so I personally like to just clean the data in beyond 2020, so get the geographies I'm interested in as well as the indicators, and then I export it into Excel to do any kind of manipulations. So again, Michael's going to go over that later. So this was what it would look like for the first slide I showed you, and then the second slide I showed you. And then if you're more of a data visualization person, you can obviously do a lot of things like put it into tables, charts, graphs. So again, this is just another way to see that economic immigrants, specifically principal applicants, where data is available, have higher median total incomes. As well, when we compare both median total income and median employment income, there isn't too big of a difference in economic immigrants' incomes, but we do see a little difference between the two income measures in other immigration streams, like those of refugees and the spouses and dependents of principal applicants, which could indicate a higher use of social assistance. But this is just some of the insights you can gain when using the IMDB. And what's nice about the IMDB through the community data program is the availability of having it at the community level. I know in Northern Ontario, we're very particular about not being grouped with the entire province of Ontario. We really like having that local level data, especially if your organization, your local immigration partnership has a regional mandate. Having the data for the community you serve, of course, is always beneficial. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll flip it back over to Mike.
Thanks a lot, Mercedes. That's great. So we wanted to show a couple examples from the IMDB, what you can do. One, so that was, an example of what could be done with the core tables, and I'll show, something that could be done with the ICARE data. So I wasn't planning on going through the whole process of how to download the data. We have a lot of webinars. We have an orientation coming up at the end of the month, in fact, on the program and how to use the catalog. But if you've gotten to this point, you essentially just click on the table that you're interested in and add to your cart and follow the instructions from there. And you will end up, after having downloaded it, with a Beyond 2020 file that's open. So if you haven't already, you would have, we have a link to download Beyond 2020 on the site as well under the resources tab. It's in there somewhere. I will trust you can find it. So I wanted to work through an example, say, to look at retention rates. And the idea was going to be, and I'll go through this, I'm going to put it into Excel and play around with the data a little bit. So for those of you who are power users, you may find this a little boring, but after this, I'll take, hopefully, it should be done in about 10 minutes. We can start taking some questions, and we're happy to work through other examples. Here, this is sort of billed as a bit of a workshop, so please feel free to ask questions on what you can or can't do with the data. So if we wanted to ask the question, how do retention rates differ based on settlement services received? And I was suggesting we could look at 5-year retention rates. And suggestion was made to look at red deer as an example. We can use another geography later. So I will, finding your geography in Beyond 2020, make sure that you have the geography dimension selected. And I'm looking, they've abbreviated it here, but I'm looking in the English label, and you see I've just done this recently, red deer. Select OK, and the table is reduced to show anything that matches red deer in the name. So I will select this red deer here. This is the CSD that I want, and not Red Deer County around it, although we could do both. For now, I'll just use this. And to look at the 5-year retention rate, I will look at, so starting with those who landed in 2014 and filed taxes in 2019. So we have these two. Pull down the settlement services dimension, so you can see this is the list of settlement services that are received. You can also receive services before arriving in Canada. So this is specifically looking at those who receive services in Canada. One thing, if you attended the IMD webinar that we held previously, Eric had a great example showing the progression of incomes following the receiving of employment services or other settlement services. One thing that we don't have in this data set is the year that these settlement services were received. So that makes it, you have to can only really make some broad conclusions when you're using these data. The table was going to start to get a little bit complicated if we included that as well, particularly if you wanted to look at years after a particular settlement service included. But that's not to say that in future iterations we couldn't try to work something like that into the tables. But this being our first foray, this is what we have. So for right now, this is showing a 5-year retention rate for those who landed in 2014, filed taxes in 2019, in Red Deer. And this is for all admission categories, all world areas of birth, and total population by age and sex. And so the retention rate is given here. If we wanted to play with these data, I could just simply highlight it, hit Control-C, flip over to Excel, and if I hit Control-Paste, the data are put here. There's something a bit wonky with this row. If I shift the cells up, let me just expand that a little so you can see it. When you do this copy paste from Beyond 2020, it preserves all of these dimensions up here are given sort of in the header here. So landing group 2014, tax year 2019, indicating a total age and sex. Just clean this up a little bit. Again, so we've got by settlement service received, indicating the retention rate, but so I could continue this if I wanted to and take, for those who landed in 2013 and filed taxes in 2018. If you can see how I'm manipulating Beyond 2020 with this highlighted, I can scroll through the various choices. So there's another 5-year retention rate, which you can bring in and paste. Again, it's a little bit wonky, that line, but I've done that here for 2014 to 2019, 2013 to 2018, 2012 to 2017, going down to 2010 and 2015. So you can look at this year by year and see that, say in 2000, for the group landing in 2014, retention rate here was really highest in those who received resettlement assistance program, but it's good to note that we're talking about a fairly small sample here. So there was 30 persons received resettlement assistance, benefits of the resettlement assistance program, and all 30 stayed in Red Deer in 2019. And if you want to look, so those who did not receive settlement services, had a retention rate of 69.2%, and while those who did had a retention rate of 72.2%. So that's a particular year, those who arrived in 2014 and filed tax in 2014. But if we wanted to say, group all this together and look at the group, everyone arriving between 2010 and 2014, then I would use this formula, which, if you're in, we do have this spelled out in the catalog entry for any of these tables that include mobility data. The retention rate is calculated by looking at those that stayed in their intended census subdivision or census division, if you're looking at that, divided by the sum of those that stayed in and those that left. So if I wanted to look at this group, you can just take this sum, that would be equal to this plus this, this plus this. Now I can just copy this down, and I should be able to just copy it over as well. So that is the sum of these 5 years. Formula is copied here as well. And so the retention rate for these would be equal to this divided by this plus this. Oh, sorry. Thanks for your patience. Convert it to a percentage. You can see we had, this gives you now 5-year retention, average 5-year retention rate for immigrants that landed in Red Deer between 2010 and 2014. I can bring this over if you want. I went ahead, so obviously I done this exercise beforehand. You can chart the data in Excel easily enough. So that's as much of an example as I planned on doing with these data, and thought that at this point we have the tables open and happy to work through some questions. We can talk specifically about this. We have a subject matter expert from StatsCan, so if anyone has any questions about what's been done, then I can turn it over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Michael, and to all of our presenters. A couple of questions have popped up in the chat so far, so maybe we'll just start with those and then we can open things up. And maybe I could say it might be the most efficient way to do this would be just for people to put their questions in the chat and I can manage them from there. So if you have questions about the IMDB itself, the content of it, what we have available to us through the community data program and the immigration data portal, or questions about how to work with the data. And if you have specific questions that you'd like to have our panel kind of work through with you, then please go ahead and begin putting those questions in the chat. To begin though, a couple of questions that have come up already. And the first one would be, I think, for Eric, and it's about the data in the IMDB and just confirming that the IMDB does not contain data on immigrants younger than 15 years of age. And then an associated question, if we have immigrants to Canada who arrived before the age of 15 and then, you know, obviously they pass that age, are they thereafter included in the IMDB data set?
So the IMDB actually has information on all immigrants since 1980, regardless of age.
Okay.
The part with the 15 plus comes in, generally speaking, when we provide aggregate tables with tax data. We, as a standard practice, which follows along with standard practice of other departments, other divisions within StatsCan, like the census, say, for example, or income stats division, we generally filter those tables to those who are 15 years of age or older, because generally speaking, people who are under 15 don't tend to file taxes. But at the bottom, or rather, as a whole, the IMDB has information, at the very least, landing characteristics of all immigrants, from age 1 day all the way till well over 100. So it's available. Tax data, a little bit harder to find for those individuals under the age of 15, but if they file taxes, it's technically there, the microdata. And to answer the second part of the question, yes, once they turn 15, so in a given year, if they were, say, for example, immigrated at age 5, 10 years later, they filed taxes at age 15, they would then be included in any aggregate tables that we have.
Excellent, thanks so much. A question about the ICARE data, and not exactly sure who might be in the best position to answer this, but the question is, can we assume that settlement services received outside of Canada refers to pre-landing or pre-arrival services? Does anyone have any insight on that particular question?
What we have in terms of data links to IMDB for settlement services, we have data on both domestically provided service. So the settlement service data we have, the IMDB, is federally funded services. So we don't have data coming from provincial partners or anything smaller than that. Say, for example, anything, maybe a private institution or a community of individuals. The settlement services data refers to federally funded settlement services. And to answer the question more specifically, we have information on domestic services and what we call foreign services. So the term pre-landing services, maybe, it's not something that we've used on our team, but if you're referring to the fact that, yes, there are services that are received internationally that are federally funded, and we do have data on those as well, although only from 2015 forward, where we have settlement services data from 2013 forward.
Thanks again, Eric. Yeah, my intuition is that that would be what we generally refer to as pre-arrival services, but not 100% certain there. Okay, now going to the chat, a question from Sangita. If we were doing GBA plus analysis on economic outcomes, can we do cross-tab analysis? Anyone want to take on that one?
I'm happy to blast off on all of these. Yes. So with the tables that are provided, from what I could just see from the presentation from Michael and Mercedes, the way Beyond 2020 works is if you've ever used an Excel pivot table, it's like the most user-friendly pivot table you could use. So you could do crosstab. I think the tables had both age and sex as well as world area of birth. So they're,
we've got a couple of people here that need to mute their microphones. If you could please just check and make sure that you are muted. Thank you.
So yes, and you could do cross-tab analysis with those tables that I saw in an example. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks very much. Next question there in the chat. With regionally aggregated ICARE data, is service duplication a challenge? For instance, when the data is being reported, are clients coded at intake or after receiving services? I'm not too sure who might be best situated to address that question.
I can speak from a data side of things because I only work with, I suppose, the end of the lifetime of the data, because what we receive at Statistics Canada is the already somewhat processed microdata. So we don't know what it looks like at intake. Now, the settlement services data module is fairly comprehensive. So some modules, say for example, language training module, will have multiple instances of data input for a person. So if they receive language training, let's say they had 15 sessions, well, we might have information on all 15 sessions within that data set. So the data that's being given to us has information at multiple steps. If it's intake, during, and after. The question itself might be out of my depth because I think it's speaking more to the actual settlement service provider. But in terms of the micro data, what we have at StatsCan, that question or part of that question could be answered. But with the aggregate tables that are available in CDP, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, they wouldn't have anything that detailed.
Yeah, great. And if there's anybody on the call who happens to have a lot of expertise with ICARE, that the interface and how ICARE data is collected and inputted from the settlement services side, please feel free to offer any clarification you can on that in the chat. A question from Alex, a very novice user here. I think probably not alone there, Alex. Are you able to do a brief walkthrough of how to use the CDP data finder? This may not be the right space for that, only if there's time. I think this might be the right space for that.
Absolutely. I guess I'm not quite sure I understand what's meant by green Canadian data sets, but it certainly don't. If you're talking about the CDP data finder, if you're talking about the catalog.
Yes. Yes, the green, the green screen there.
Oh, got you. Okay. I was thinking environmental or yeah. So this this is where you can search for various data sets in the CDP catalog. For this webinar, focusing specifically on the IMDB data set. So if you were looking for that, you can just scroll down and find it here. If you just start typing in IMDB or longitudinal, it'll come up and you need to click on it to select it. Once you have that, in this case, you don't really need to use a lot of these other fields. As you add search criteria, the search results need to match all of these criteria. So if I was to look for IMDB data and Canada Post, I'm going to get 0 results. You can double up. You can add additional data sets within one of these search filters. So this would return Canadian business accounts and Longitudinal Immigration Database, but between the filters, the results have to match both. So my recommendation, if you're using this to find data, this is where I go first, is the product group, because typically, if you're thinking about a question needs to be answered, the type of data, the type of product is probably going to give you a good indication of where the answer would be. You can put in part of the title. This product title, it needs to match any part of the text in this link. So this is your title. So if I just put in longitudinal, it's going to find all the longitudinal immigration databases in there. And so if you're looking for one of the tables, say specifically you want the tables that have mobility, or mobility is, say, one of the easier ones to look for. I could look for longitudinal immigration database, and any table that has the word mobility in the title, and then it gives me these results. Again, so geographies, I don't really recommend you using this, at least not at the start. This is good. Almost all of our data sets have, say, census subdivision and census division data in it. You know, I would recommend you could use this if you're interested in tables that have custom geographies and you want to know what there is. I think in your question, you had asked about looking for a specific municipality. So this does not search for data for a specific municipality. So that's not what the geography field is for. When we order data for the entire country, or, you know, with the exception of, say, custom geography tables, that's only for specific custom geographies that have been submitted. But for any geographic level that you have here, postal city, you know, census agglomeration, the census subdivision, that will be for all of the census subdivisions in Canada when we get a table. And then it's for you to look within the table for the census subdivision that's of interest. In this case, this table has been split up by, so these are the prairie provinces that, well, prairies, I guess, and you know, Saskatchewan, Alberta's in there too. I always think a bit on this. Anyway, so it's for you to look for your geography of interest in the table. So if you want to know how to do that, if as a novice user, you would go to the geography dimension, and you can either click on this search button, or under dimension and search, you've got some options for how to look in this dimension. You can see that there's a few different options here. This is looking at data values. The code refers to, if I change the labels here, each census subdivision has its own unique identifier. And so you can search by this code, or you can look, typically, you know, this might say English here, but in this case, it's been abbreviated to E. So that's the English description, which is really referring to the name. So I look for Red Deer. Alex, did you have a particular municipality in mind, or? Of course, now it has to be in the prairies, but you know, if we were looking for Calgary or Winnipeg, it reduces the table to show anything that matches my text string. And here I found Winnipeg. I can get rid of this by right-clicking and hiding it. And now I have the data for Winnipeg. And if I if I put this up into the dimensions up here, I would do that by pulling down another dimension. You can see now that this table is being filtered for the values for Winnipeg. So that's, I'm not sure if I've answered your question in finding data for specific municipalities. Great. Yeah, when you get a table like this, the file names typically are going to indicate what part of Canada. We get tables for all of Canada, so they'll have Atlantic. They might have, Ontario or Quebec may, because they're rather large, maybe have their own file. BC and territories might be together, and so you'll see from the file name. I don't have the zip file open here, but you can generally figure out where your geography is of interest from the file name.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you very much. I have another question in the chat. I think it's gonna come back to you once again, but I'll just read it out here. The IMDB tables are great for the level of detail and multiple dimensions provided, and it feels like we've barely scratched the surface of what's possible with them. One challenge has been trying to create concise indicators from that much detail, and then to create data visualizations that are accessible to the community. I'm wondering if StatsCan or others in the room have examples of data visualizations that present excerpts from the data in a simpler way than the interactive tools on StatsCan's website. So maybe a chance to look at some of our data visualizations on the CDP.
Yeah, we do. We have been putting data into Tableau, and we do have an agreement with the National LIP Secretariat to turn some of these data into dashboards or infographics. It's one of these is going to be using, at least one of them will be using the IMDB data. So I can show you what we have. Let's say if we do have the mobility in and out of LIP's dashboard, and I think we have the recent.
Do you want to maybe share screen, Michael, so we can see how you navigate?
Sorry, of course, I thought I forgot that I'm no longer.
No problem.
Thanks for that. So under our various portals, we have the Tableau Infographics and Dashboards portal, which will bring you here. We do have a couple of infographics, one of which is for all immigrants and one for recent immigrants. This is using 2016 data, but there's a good chance that we'd be recreating this with 2021 data at some point in the future. Why don't I go through the whole process here, because it may be about as fast as trying to find where it is on my hard drive. Is everyone familiar? I'm going rather quickly through the downloading process. It's my list of file downloads. Just put in arrivals. So you will need a Tableau viewer in order to look at data like this. So this is not from the IMDB. We don't have any data in Tableau from the IMDB yet. But if you have suggestions for what you would like to see in such visualization, we're more than happy to hear it. I mean, it could simply be a dashboard where we just throw a lot of data in all the dimensions, and you can cross-tabulate it by whatever variables you want. This may take a little bit because Tableau Reader takes a little bit of time. This is a very simple infographic. Just you can select your geography of interest, and then it gives a simple picture of the recent immigrant population for that geography. This isn't I understand this isn't entirely responding to your question, because you were asking specifically about the IMDB and the fact that you'd like a way to access these various dimensions and visualize them in a simpler fashion. I'm sort of taking the opportunity here just to show off some of what we can do in Tableau. It might be better if I could show an example of what a Tableau dashboard might look like, that we could do something similar for the IMDB data, but again, that doesn't also doesn't entirely answer the question. But this is the sort of thing that we're moving towards with these data, which should be done before March 2023. So we have we'll be kicking off development of a Tableau dashboard product using IMDB data early in 2023. But we'd use something like this, where for the IMDB, you would be selecting either census division data or census subdivision, or the custom geographies that the LIPs submitted. If we selected that, then we can look at a list of LIPs that submitted their custom geographies. So we can say at Cape Breton, and then the data are populated for recent immigrants in Cape Breton. Total population 120,000, recent immigrants 400. Comparing median ages, top birth country, economic status, level of education. One thing, I don't know if, I guess, I know that the IMDB group does have some very interesting interactive data visualization tools on their site, from which we could take inspiration for what we develop. I don't know if that's something that's worth showing here, or if it's queued up, Eric. But
yeah, I got them lined up already, but I'm just actually, Peter, if you don't mind me asking you directly, I'm just wondering if you have an example of a particular indicator, the accuracy, or rather the concision of the indicator that you're looking for, because that would help me focus my answer.
See if the audio works. Great. Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and part of asking it was I don't really have an answer, but what we found, particularly, I think particularly for me, if it's possible to somehow combine multiple admission years to show an indicator of how immigrants are faring over time. And I know the stuff on SACAN's website gets to that for the income indicators, but yeah, I think that's the big sort of challenge I haven't quite figured out on our side yet, is how do we show multiple sort of cohorts of immigrants and line their experience up relative to their time in Canada in a way that's sort of clear and understandable to the community, and be able to say something like it takes X years to reach parity for this group with the general population, or that kind of thing.
That's a very pertinent question. Oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I guess, so when you're talking about cohorts that you want to look at, you know, in recent years, we have everything split out by year, and then, you know, you can only go so many years, like you can only go so many years into the future. So, I mean, I chose 5 years just to have a little bit of I guess I mean, could have used 3 years, I guess. So I guess I'm trying to imagine how you would like to, so you would like to group these individual landing years, and what measure you want to look at, sort of group the.
Well, I think it's more of an exploration of like, you know, the indicator we're probably interested in is how many years does it take somebody in Canada to, you know, achieve certain economic outcomes. And so, like, there is already lots and lots of detail to be able to say, like, economic immigrants who arrived in 2016 had these outcomes in, you know, 2017, 18, and 19. And it's more just a curiosity of, like, if there's an example out there of how people have, you know, sort of re-aggregated the data and been able to say something that brings together multiple cohorts or multiple categories together. And yeah, I'm not expecting like here's our list of indicators that we've already done, because I know this is a new data set for everyone, but just curious if folks have delved into it in different ways.
I do see a problem immediately with the economic outcomes tables, in that if you want to combine cohorts, we have everything. Oh, sorry, no, we do. I was looking at, yeah, you'd have to be using the means and not the medians. We have a lot of medians, which can't really be aggregated into, can't take several cohorts put together, but you could use the mean total income.
Even that I probably wouldn't do, just because the populations aren't necessarily weighed appropriately. So if you're adding 5 years of emissions, their incomes aren't properly weighed to be mean in that sense, to be averaged out in that way. And further, generally speaking, we don't like, means aren't something we tend to disseminate often on the IMDB, because we have some really strict rules around disseminating means. Now, that being said, sorry, I've got a little Borker in my house.
No worry, we can hear you fine.
Okay, so to answer your question, I don't think anything that Mike and CDP would have available in terms of data would have that aggregation, but it's, I mean, it's certainly doable. What you're referring to is something we do often, and it's something Mike demonstrated with mobility and aggregating admission cohorts. So if you wanted to see, for example, instead of looking at it in terms of a landing cohort of the year 2013, you want to look at, okay, how many years does it take for, let's say, a particular cohort, people who immigrated under a certain program, to catch up with the rest of the immigrants, or catch up with those who are Canadian born in terms of their incomes. And a common practice is to aggregate those years. Unfortunately, I don't think of the data that's available that exists, but it's not that, like, it's something we can't make. It's something we often use as an analytical tool to understand, okay, let's remove the factor that is a particular year, and let's focus or narrow our analysis on years since. So all those, you know, who immigrated, or all those who filed taxes 5 years after admission, 6 years, 10 years, 15 years. And that would probably get the answer in this particular case study you're providing. But these aren't things that are necessarily available to you via this data program right now. But it's definitely doable.
That's good to know, because I probably would have suggested, if people were, you know, if you're looking for something to roll up by aggregating certain admission years to create a new cohort, would have suggested using mean total income, because it's the only mean economic outcome that we have. But so just to be clear on the answer, it's because,
well, if you were to, the way the mean is designed, it's for that particular emission year. So you're averaging, I mean, as you know, when you're doing an average, you're just essentially adding up all the incomes and then averaging those out.
Yeah.
But then if you're adding those 5 averages together, that's not the same as adding all the incomes that are within those averages.
but if you have the count, so you can create an aggregate using the mean, you can create an aggregate total income for a certain admission year. So if I have the count that's associated with this mean, so 60,605 times a mean total income of 23,500, that creates an aggregate income for that year. And then I add that aggregate income for 2016, 2017, 2018, and then make a cohort out of that, divide by, add those 3 aggregate incomes and divide by the total number of tax filers. That's a new mean.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right.
Is that acceptable, or is there?
Absolutely. I'm speaking for place of specificity because I'm thinking about the gears inside how we make these things. And if you were to, for example, get a new data table with new means in the way that you design, they may be different than the ones that you're calculating in this sense.
Okay.
So no, you're not wrong. Absolutely right. You could do that. Precision may be off by a little bit, but you still get a really good idea of what's going on.
Okay.
So I'm speaking in an ideal world, I suppose, versus the actual world in which we live in. But yes, and to answer your question, Peter, I don't know if that's available in the data holdings that are in the CDP right now, but it's something that you could definitely do, or I suppose request through Mike for potentially new tables in the future for the IMDB. We appreciate your support.
Great stuff. We're getting into the nuts and bolts of things here. This is great. I have a couple of questions that maybe can be combined here. The first one's coming from Mohammed, and it's quite a specific question about immigrants accessing settlement services in a particular geography in a particular year, and coming back with very low numbers. And Mohammed is wondering if maybe he's made some mistake, because when he looks again at the IMDB file for immigrants accessing settlement services in Hamilton in 2019, he's getting low numbers. And that led to another question from Dan, which is asking just whether all new permanent residents immigrated in a particular year are included in the IMDB ICARE tables. And if not, what proportion would be included? In a tax year field, roughly what proportion are included again? So I'm not sure exactly if those two questions can be combined, but
Let me have a look at economic immigrants use settlement services in Hamilton.
Yeah, maybe Michael, while you look at that, maybe a question for Eric, just to clarify,
Yeah.
if it's a total count, including all permanent residents from a particular year, or a proportion.
I think in the tables that we provided, we're cross-tabulating emission year with tax year. So it wouldn't necessarily be all new permanent residents for a particular year. So when we say emission year, without restriction, it's all those who were admitted in a particular year. So if you're looking at the year 2019, it's all immigrants who immigrated in 2019. If we're looking at immigrant tax filers, then it's only those who filed taxes. So the proportion of those who filed taxes varies from year to year. I don't know all the numbers offhand. So obviously it depends on the age groups you're looking at. Anywhere between 60 to 80 to 90%. I couldn't give you an exact proportion, but the universe that you're looking at is those who were admitted in a year and then filed taxes in a given tax year. Admitted in 2015, filed taxes in 2018, or admitted in 2015 and filed taxes in 2019. For a rough proportion, I guess 3/4, 25%, but I don't know what the number is specifically.
Yeah, in this case, all but 10 seem to have not received. This is for, although this is a landing group, perhaps these didn't. What if we look at a more recent landing group. So here, 260 economic immigrants receive settlement services. 275, 260. I'm just going up in tax year here. So are these numbers a little more towards what you would be expecting?
Just a quick question, maybe to clarify that, Michael. Is this specifying the year of receiving settlement services? I'm seeing tax year 2018 here. Okay.
No. So yeah, I guess this is, yeah, so going through the tax year, yeah, I'm changing the tax year, but these would be a lot of the same immigrants. So it's not that surprising that the numbers are staying the same. But
right. So if a particular individual received settlement services, that would, no matter what year, any year after that, they would be counted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for specifying that. So, and then as we go through, let's go to the latest tax year so that we can catch anyone that's received settlement services. So those landing in 2010, 130 received some sort of settlement services. 2011, 140, 170, 210. So I don't know if these numbers seem a little more plausible. It may have been, I wonder if it was the landing group that you were looking at. Like an earlier landing group, the landing group, you know, these landing groups had very low counts of people receiving settlement services. There's 20. And then as you get into later years.
A broad swath piece of advice when using something like Beyond 2020 is you got to check all the variables, because if you have a particular cross that you're not aware of, for some reason you have people who are 65 plus, right? You might have a tough time finding individuals in that age group. You might make your numbers look artificially low. So just be careful what you're looking for.
That's excellent advice. You have to be careful. I mean, so here I've left the cursor, you know, I clicked here. If I go and I move this around, or say I clicked here, and now I want to change, you know, the landing group. I'm not noticing that it stayed on. This entire table is being filtered for resettlement, those who receive resettlement assistance program, because I left the cursor there. If you want the table to be, you want to have all, you know, everyone in the universe included for this filter, you have to make sure that the cursor is on the total selected. So now it's on the total. But you can easily, that's an easy mistake to make when you're playing with Beyond 2020. So you know, if I leave it on 15 to 24, and then I go to change the dimension, the table is being filtered for that variable. We can change it back to the total. Has that sort of answered the question? I think that Dan had a question as well.
Dan's data, I think, was about the inclusion, how comprehensive the inclusion of the cohort of new immigrants, I think, was in a particular year. Dan, did you feel it was? Yeah, it was answered. That's great.
Okay.
Just a quick technical question. Challenges around using Beyond 2020 with a MacBook or with an iOS system.
No, sorry, and I don't even think. Anyway, no. The answer is just no, unfortunately.
The easiest way is to get a PC, I suppose.
Well, that's simple, at least.
Yeah, no expertise on my end for that. I'm sorry.
Okay. again, just I'll put it out there to anyone. We've got a bit of time left, about 10 minutes left. If there are any other questions popping up, I might just throw one out there. Maybe not a very well formulated question, but just around working in smaller communities with, and my terminology has escaped me, but I'm thinking embargoed, or just when you have small numbers and you look at the data sets and you can't necessarily look at the indicators when small populations are involved. Any advice? Thank you. Repressed. Any advice when working on, and maybe we can pull up an example. I mean, Jasper, I think, as a community is a good example. My own community, because we are quite small, where the limitations might be in working in smaller communities with IMDB data in particular.
I don't know if I guess Eric had some good advice for that. I guess just to be careful.
Yeah, well, it depends, right? So when you're looking at something like mobility, the gold standard we use is retention rate. It's the most obvious and most poignant proportion you can make. How many people stayed? X amount of years later, 1, 3, 5, 10 years later, what proportion of people stayed? When you get to small counts, you have to be careful because the IMDB rounds to the 5 for a number of individuals when you're looking at mobility. So say, for example, your community has a fairly small number of immigrants and you're looking at a population of 20. That means that number could be 10, it could be 30, could be 20, right? So when you're looking at a change over time, year over year, if your retention rate jumps from 25% to 75%, that is more likely due to rounding than actual retention rate change. But that's only for really small counts. Once you get into more reasonable counts in the hundreds and so, then those numbers can be more reflective of what's actually going on. But be wary of proportions at those lower levels of, or those lower counts. For incomes, very robust. So when you're looking at a median for a small population, it's still a very robust number. So you could take that as the truth, as best as the administrative data can represent it. When you're looking at proportions, just if you see something that looks wild, just be sure to look at the actual counts because it may be indicative of something else.
Great, thanks for that. I see Michael's still sort of playing around with the Jasper data.
Yeah, just well, people can look and see what some of these small numbers look like. But you know, I think Eric had great insight on that.
Great stuff. Okay. We still do have a few minutes for anyone. I mean, and please don't be embarrassed if your questions are very sort of basic or really just about how to access and work with or download data. Any of these types of questions, now is the time. Okay.
I don't know if it's going to get, I mean, you don't have to type it either if you want to just unmute your mic.
So going back to the under 15, so immigration information for people under the age of 15, is it present or, I mean, yeah, I guess I'm not sure, is that kind of information available? I know that a lot of the information is based on taxpayers, so they of course don't fit in that. So is there readily available that data?
Readily available in the data that was presented today? I don't think so. In the data that we have at StatsCan that I make in the IMDB, yes, it is available. And we're looking at tax information. We have tax information at both the individual level and at the family level. So we could, so for example, the tax files that we use, the T1FF, the T1 family file, we link family information together. So even though a child may not be filing taxes, you can still get some information about, say, for example, where they're living based on where their parents are filing. We also have additionally, in terms of microdata holdings, and we have a published table online, we design a module, it's called the Children's Tax Module, where we link children to the parents' tax filings, regardless if they're immigrants or not. And then you can use that to understand, say, for example, their economic situation as children. So if you land at age 4, what was your household like in terms of tax filing? I mean, it's pretty nebulous. You can probably garner a lot of information from the tax filing. What were economic situations like as a child in your household, and how does that affect you in the future? So you could follow, even though they're not filing taxes under the age of 18, for example, you could follow what happened to them in their household as a child in terms of tax information of the parents, and what happens to their taxes in the future. One of the poignant examples, and I think there's a research paper online with StatsCan, I think there is anyway. One of the examples we give is a low-income indicator. So was the family in a low-income household growing up? How does that affect the future outcomes? Right, so that would be an example you could do with the IMDB. So even though there isn't necessarily a tax file available for someone who's under the age of 15, we still have a lot of ways to get that information, although I don't think it's readily available in the data holdings in the CDP at the moment. But I could be wrong about that. And also, hey, ask us, we'll make it for you. We appreciate what's what I'm looking for. Customer is the wrong word, but we're happy to serve the community. I hope that answers your question.
Sort of a bit of a follow-up question to that. So you do have data from IRCC. You have a lot of the same data that IRCC has on landed immigrants. So
yeah,
for the entire population, starting from day 1, you indicated, and can those be classified by admission category and various other dimensions that are in the not talking about mobility or economic outcomes, just a lot of this is a long way to saying it's been taking me a long time to get data from, I am in the middle of the process of trying to get data from IRCC, and it's taking a long time, and I'm often wondering myself, why can't I just do this with StatsCan? Because you guys have a much greater production capacity, and things get turned out a lot faster, and in Beyond 2020 format.
So we at StatsCan aren't the data custodians for that type of data. The IMDB team in particular, what we can release and talk about are the economic outcomes and mobility outcomes of those particular groups.
Okay.
We do not have the purview of talking about emissions data with the public at large. So that's unfortunately under the purview of IRCC. Not unfortunately, let me take that back. That is under IRCC's purview. Unfortunately, StatsCan can't talk about those data.
Yeah.
So unless it's coming from the census, or unless it's coming from other data sources that speak about specifically that, the stock and flow of emissions and temporary resident permit allocation comes from IRCC.
Okay. It would be great if they could maybe use you as their production capacity. Although I know you guys are stretched fairly thin, like the demands on you are quite great already. You probably don't need another.
We're a pretty small team already. Yeah, I mean, maybe they will in the future. I have no idea. There are no discussions, that kind of thing. But if they hear it from people like you, maybe they'll think about it twice.
It would, yeah, because it's anyway. That's a little taster for we are trying to get IRCC data, but it's been about a year in the making. This the process trying to get these tables. So
well, I'll take that as a compliment for the expediency in which StatsCan works.
Oh, it's great. It is always a pleasure working with you guys. Also,
great. Well, maybe beginning of a movement to break down another silo in federal government. Maybe a quick last question before we wrap things up today. Should be a pretty straightforward one. How frequently is IMDB data updated with information from the most recent tax filing year or admission year? We update every year. The time lag for admission year is usually 1. So in the year 2022, December 5th, we're going to be releasing the 2021 vintage of the IMDB, which will include admissions up to the year 2021. We will have T1FF tax information up to 2020. And we'll have a subset of that, which is T4 information, so wages up to the year 2021. So it's usually T-1 or T-2, depending how quickly we can get it out. Okay, excellent. Thanks very much. I want to thank everybody for joining today. I want to extend a special thanks to our presenters, Michael, to Eric, and Mercedes for providing so much information to us today. And I would be much remiss if I didn't also thank Satya Nanya, who on our NLS side he's our primary organizer of these events and of our partnership with the Community Data Program. So thank you very much, Satya. Once again, thanks to everyone for joining. Oh, and a very quick last question from Dan. I don't want to leave you out. Will the new year of IMDB data be added to the CDP soon after December 5th?
Not soon after, no. Because I am still, the request is still to go in. I'm going to start processing that very soon. And then I don't expect, Eric might have better, but it'll maybe be a few months, you know, before it's in our hands and in the catalog. So
okay,
but it being this is going to be, we are working on updating it.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Michael, and thanks to everyone once again.